Hello, I bring you greetings from Texas. I'm very honored to be part of this committee and this panel and to share my research along with the great presentations that my colleagues have given. I'm going to be talking today about plantations and representations of the deaths related to slave victims in those spaces. My contact information. This is my university. We are located on an island in South Texas, right on the Gulf of Mexico. Quickly, I use the terms the enslaved and slave victim kind of interchangeably. The enslaved is the preferred term when talking about people who were in slavery. But for a lot of what I'm trying to do in my research, I use the term slave victim at times with the idea that victim really carries a lot of power and a lot of force. It's really got a lot of effect. Unfortunately, when people think about plantations, they think about, a place you go where you have fun. You've got the beautiful mansion. In 30 minutes, you can go and take a tour and see all the beautiful furniture. It will only cost you $24. But you can see this idyllic setting. And, it's all about being happy and being entertained. But when I think about the reality of visually how these spaces, were for the slave victims, I often compare the plantation spaces to concentration camps. Imagine if you went to a concentration camp and the tour guide said, look at the architecture of the building, look at the style, look at the furniture inside, and or maybe even talked about the scenery. Many concentration camps are located in very beautiful forest areas, and never mentioned the Holocaust victims. Because when we talk about people in the Holocaust, we use that term victim. And, what if the tour guide never said anything about the fact that people died and those things that happen in those spaces? So that's what I look at in my research, visual representations of victims in memorial spaces, and plantations and concentration camps are a couple of examples of what I've studied. So for this project, I was looking at U.S. heritage plantations that are located in the southern U.S. They're mainly meant for tourism purposes. And so I looked at their websites to see online in these spaces if I could find any visual representations of the death and dying experiences of the slave victims. Visual material rhetoric is my methodology. It helps us to find the power that's created through visual presentations, not only looking at the meaning created, but also the effects and how those effects can create beliefs within the viewer, these people who visit these plantation websites. So I picked 12, and in my attempt to find any memorials related to deaths of slave victims, these are the ones I picked. I didn't have a specific methodology. They are all heritage sites. They did all have their own website, and the website was fairly well developed, so there would be enough for me to do some research. And I have actually been to all of these plantations and done research. So my questions: what I found in looking for these memorials, looking at memorials for white family members or white owners, any tours, any maps. Mainly on these websites, there was very little information related to death and dying for either group. And that, goes along with this idea of how these plantation spaces function, this idea of having fun. We don't want to think about, bad things. We don't want to think about things from the past. Those things aren't very entertaining. So there was a little bit of mention of some burial places for slave victims. Here's an example, one for Adam. You could see he was buried in St. John the Baptist Catholic Cemetery. And these kind of records are really vary so much from plantation to plantation. So many things happen with records, and then the different plantations, they all have a different focus as to what they want to share. Some of the sites, do a lot more with the database of the slave victim information. Belmead had some information. Robert Greene, apparently he was a horse groomer. His obituary is published nationwide, and his funeral was attended by prominent Nashvillians, black and white alike. And at the Hermitage, the home of our U.S. President Andrew Jackson, they listed Alfred, who was buried in the family graveyard, which is right next to the plantation house. And in that graveyard, he was also buried close to Jackson. So these questions really, like I said, there really weren't memorials to speak of. A few mentions or pictures of family graveyards. That's about all I found. But on the question about maps, I did find some interesting stuff. At the Drayton Hall, this is the map they have online. When I was there, the map I was given actually showed a slave cemetery, and this one does not show the slave cemetery. The slave cemetery is off over here. Now, when I was there also, the tour I went on, the tour guide didn't take us to the slave cemetery. We were told that was something we could visit on our own. Now, since I have been at the plantation, they had a special ceremony where they celebrated the people who were buried in the cemetery, and they had this arch created. And this image is found on the website 5 times, different versions of this image. And then on the main page, they have this what's included about what you would do when you go there to visit. And the cemetery is listed along with all the other. Now, I don't know if that means it's a separate tour or exactly what you would do related to that, because I couldn't find, this is all the information I could find about the cemetery, the things I have shown you here. So you may be asking, what about the swamp? I mentioned that in my title, so what's that all about? Well, when I first started, the first place I went to do some research was Magnolia Plantation. And on the slave cabin tour, there was a man who asked if there was a slave cemetery. And the tour guide said, yes, but it's in the swamp, and it's hard to find, and it's far off, and the signage is really bad. So she gave us directions, and she was right. She said, look down, make sure you look down, because one of the signs is, 6 inches off the ground, and it's not very big. So I found it, and it really was just kind of in its native condition. There was really not much attention drawn to it. It wasn't on any of the maps. It wasn't on any of the tours. And I think if that man hadn't asked the tour guide on this tour, I would not have known about it. But that's kind of where my interest in this idea of how that element plays into, the visual that you get, the visual experience you get at a plantation. Now, the Whitney Plantation I wanted to talk about separately, because it's really it's on the other end of the spectrum from the other 11 sites that I looked at. The main focus of the Whitney Plantation is on the slave victims. That's their focus completely. They have memorials honoring over 100,000 people who were in slavery all throughout Louisiana. So it's not just the people on the Whitney Plantation, and many of the plantations do just focus on, their own people who were there. These children of Whitney statues are just beautiful. They're all throughout the site, and they don't relate to death and dying, but I just couldn't help put the image in here. Now, this is one very specific memorial related to death and dying, and it's the Field of Angels Children's Memorial for the children who died in the parish. And here again, not just on Whitney Plantation, but the parish where it's located. And you can see the wall has the information, names, and other information. And the statue is the black angel who's come down to take the baby up to heaven. So it's a very moving sight. There's many other beautiful statues and other beautiful things that really are very moving related to memorializing the slave experience. I just wanted to show the depth of the information they give. This is more information about the children and what led to them dying, and related to the age of the mother at birth and the things that happened afterwards, and other things. So the death toll they compared to a house where a child dies every year. They died from such things as drowning, epidemics, being burned, or hit by lightning. So this is just more detailed information about the children who are memorialized in the Field of Angels. Okay, so through this examination, we want to think about this idea of what are the effects, the materiality of the visual presentations we see in these plantation spaces. And there definitely is, I believe, a reinforcement of racialized thinking, slave victims not worthy of memorialization, beliefs that deny cultural oppression and support exclusion. Why do they complain? That's all in the past. Everybody's familiar with the usual, those usual ideas. Hum refers to it as the racialized gaze, the material effect of visual design, sustained practices of racialization, and perpetuate racially based social cultural exclusions. And I thought the materiality to me really came out in the Derek Chauvin when the verdict was given related to that case, and the people on the streets, were talking about how the verdict really did bring attention to the fact that this kind of thinking does exist, and it does have very dire material consequences. But they also talked a lot about that was just a step, that was a start. It certainly didn't solve the issues. And one of the things I've been thinking about related to my research more recently is critical race theory, and how that can help us think about ways to make changes, to get beyond the hegemony of whiteness, and, as Martinez says, to look for counter stories, those contrasting descriptions and narrative from a different perspective, much like what we see in the Whitney plantation. So here are my references, and please feel free to contact me. I'd be glad to share or answer any questions.